So in this video, we're going to discuss actually locking down joints and actually locking down movements. So we're going to start with the movements because that's a little bit easier for you to kind of comprehend, and then we're going to look at the actual joints themselves. And I'm not going to get into the whole biomechanics of it, but rather I want you to look at this from a more practical standpoint in terms of the way you actually think about exercising and the way you actually think about executing the exercises that you have on your plan. So thinking of it from a movement perspective, because it can kind of get lost in translation when you try to look at things from an internal standpoint. Because if you look at a squat, you know what that looks like, and you may not be able to get your body to do that perfectly, but at least in your mind's eye you can kind of think of what that should look like. Okay, whereas if I say I want you to activate your quads in a squat, that internal perspective you might not be able to, kind of jive with as well. It might be hard for you to kind of put that into the context of how do I activate my quads in a squat? Like, how do I actually do that? Am I trying to push the ground away? Am I pushing the knees forward? It can be really hard to kind of put that into the context of the exercise you're presented with. So sometimes it is better to have that external view of an exercise and that more movement-based approach to an exercise. So I've mentioned the squat, so we'll talk about the squat. When you are doing your squats, when you're doing any exercise in the gym, first of all, actually just think through what that movement is accomplishing. So first of all, you have to know why it's on your plan, because if you're just saying, just do squats, and is this working my legs, my back? I kind of feel it in my arms and my upper back. Is that where it's working? If you don't know what it's actually accomplishing, you're always going to be at a loss to feel the exercise and also progress the exercise, because you don't know what it is actually progressing. You're like, are my legs getting stronger? My upper body getting stronger? Is this movement getting stronger? Is my technique good? I don't know why I'm doing it, so I don't know how to modify my technique for my goals. So understanding the exercise, why it's there, how to perform it then is kind of vital to actually progressing the exercise long term. But looking at that squat, what I want you to do right now, and be honest with yourself, assess whether you are actually keeping tension where you think the tension should be on your legs, your back, your glutes, whatever it is. Whatever you just said, the reason you had squats in your program, just assess, are you actually targeting that when you perform that exercise? If you're saying, I have front squats in my program because they target the quads better than low bar squats, you're saying that's your rationale. You're like, that's why I have them there. Or maybe you're a powerlifter or something, you're using front squats to build up your quads after you've done more heavier work with low bar squat. Perhaps that's the reason. But then assess, are you actually using that are you using that tool correctly? Are you actually putting that tension on the quads, or are you just going through the movement itself for the sake of actually going through the movement? Are you losing the tension every which way? Your hips shifting forward and back? Are you going beyond your active range? Are you collapsing at the core, the low back? What's breaking down here? Are you actually targeting what you think you're targeting with that exercise? The squat is a really good one because most people have performed a squat. Most people know what a squat is. So right now, stand up, as long as you're not in public. I don't care if you're in public, do it. Stand up and squat down as if you are performing the exercise. And what I want you to do when you squat down is go down as far as you feel comfortable within your active range. Maybe you wear squat shoes, so maybe it is a little bit higher than usual. But either way, next time in the gym, you can do this. Squat down, and then without moving, try to put as much force into the ground as possible. And I want you to actually feel what musculature is activating. What are you actually using to initiate that movement from that most challenging bottom position? Are you normally just bouncing out of that position, using the stored elasticity in your muscles and your joints to kind of bump back out of that position? That might be perfectly valid if you're, an Olympic weightlifter or something. awesome, continue that. But if you're saying my goal is to build stronger or bigger legs, that's not an optimal approach. So sit in that bottom position and then actually put as much force into the ground as you possibly can, using the musculature that you think should be performing that exercise. So your quads, perhaps, if that's what you were saying. And put as much force into the ground. Continue to do that. 5-10 seconds. Actually feel which muscles are fatiguing, what is breaking down, like is your technique good? Even just in that bottom position, can you actually sustain yourself in that bottom position, or are you actually, terribly weak in that position even though you've a 200 kilo squat? So assess that bottom position, then just come up a little bit, maybe a quarter of the way, maybe even half of the way, and then still continue to do that. And then on that way up, actually use the musculature that you think you should be targeting. Again, in the squat, perhaps it's the quads. Actually use the quads to bring you up to that halfway point. And then again, do the exact same. Pause at that halfway point and, contract the quads by pushing into the ground. Put as much force into the ground as possible. And again, feel the musculature working, and then come up to the top position. And just ask yourself, was that more challenging than the 180 kilo squats you're doing in the gym? If it is, then you have to actually reassess whether you're just chasing numbers or you're actually chasing a particular goal. And you can do this with whatever exercise. The bench press, a push-up, I don't care. All of the exercises you perform, you can do this with. Actually assess whether you are actually using the musculature you think you're using. Assess whether you are just going through the motions, and whether you are actually keeping tension where you think the tension should be throughout the entirety of the lift. Because it's one thing to say, I know a leg extension targets the quads, but then it's another thing to actually activate the quads to perform a leg extension. So having that, I'm going to say, movement approach, like knowing that a squat is supposed to target your quads. If it's a high bar squat or if it's a front squat, we're going, okay, that's going to target my quads. But then actually knowing that and then actually feeling that because you've performed the movement correctly with tension on the musculature are two different things. And you can have that internal perspective after you felt it because you know what it feels like, but don't jump the steps ahead. Like, you have to know what the movement is, feel that movement correctly, and then you can start bringing in some internal cueing. And that's not to say that you can't use internal cueing to help find the tension in those movements. Say, for example, hamstrings. A lot of people find they have a lot of trouble activating their hamstrings, actually feeling them, because a lot of the time they're not keeping joints locked down, which we'll talk about in a second, and they're shooting the hips up, so they're not actually using their hamstrings. But you can use maybe an internal cue there and think of your hamstrings like a bicep, and flex like you would flex your arm, and a lot of people that clicks with them. So internal cueing is not bad. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying here is you need to assess the movements you're doing now from just a movement perspective, and are you actually doing the movement just to do the movement, or are you actually doing the movement to progress a particular goal? Because what I like to think of is all of the exercises you're doing in the gym, it's skill work. Okay, don't think of it as metabolic work, muscular work, strength work. It's all skill work. So you want to be thinking, am I actually building the skill? If this was an Olympic sport, if this squat here was an Olympic sport, am I performing to Olympic standard? Am I actually practicing the technique that an Olympian would have? Because they're dialing in everything. And I mean, this is what you want to have the same approach with all your exercises. And this is, again, why you'll see people saying like, oh, I love high volume, super high volume, 30 sets per muscle group per workout. And it's like, yeah, you have to do that because for none of those sets did you actually ever even lock in tension and feel the muscle working until you got to rep 10. So you obviously have to do 20 reps because you're only starting to feel it and you're only starting to actually, get any kind of stimulation until you get into the super high reps. And that's purely from, buildup of metabolites. You're not actually locking down that tension on that musculature. So you do have to kind of take that step back, start from the very basics, if you want to call them that, and actually assess whether you're performing the exercises like the exercises are supposed to be performed given the goals and the rationale that you have that exercise in your program for. Next thing then is actually locking down joints and joint structures. A lot of people will fail to realize that they are shifting the tension off the musculature because they're not actually keeping joints locked down. For example, you see this a lot on the leg extension. People are doing leg extensions and their knees are going all over the place. They do their leg extension, their knees come out to the side, or they go forward and it goes all over the place. Like, that knee is the pivot point. That's what you should be extending from. Like, your quad is what's doing the work. It isn't just about pushing that pad away from you or up. It's actually about contracting the quad to move that pad. Again, because I'm presuming you're not doing leg extensions as strength work. You're not using it to build strength, although that is what it's achieving. You're using it to, build the quads as a whole, build the strength of the quads. So you should have the tension on the quads throughout the movement. Again, it's skill work. Is that quad exercise actually stimulating the quad, or are you just randomly hitting numbers because, oh yeah, I want to progressively overload this, so I did 30 last week, so I'm going to do 35 this week, even though now you're just using a load of momentum, the hips are coming up, the knees are going in and out, you're not actually locking down those joints and thus locking down that tension throughout the lift. And that's not to say joints can't move in exercises, but if you are doing a more isolation exercise, keeping those joints locked down and not moving beyond what has to move, that's going to give you the best isolation results. It's going to give you the best strengthening results of that musculature. And again, it comes back to, you should have a rationale as to why the exercises are in your program, and then you can actually assess why or how you should adjust your technique and training methods to get you those results. So bring it a step back, assess all the exercises you're currently doing. Are you putting the tension where you think you should be putting it? If it is, again, don't get this wrong, if you're saying I'm just doing squats so I can hit some certain numbers because I'm a power lifter, awesome, as long as you stay within the confines of your rules, it doesn't matter how you squat. If you can squat with as little tension on your body as possible, awesome, you're just going to succeed at powerlifting. But if your goal is to build strength in the gym to help you on, say, a playing field, sports, whatever it is, if you're trying to do that, or you're trying to change your body composition, change your physique, actually using the tools to progress rather than progressing with the tools, that's what you should be thinking of. So do assess whether you are doing the exercises correctly from a rationale standpoint, why you have them in there. Assess how you're doing them. Are you actually keeping tension where you think you should be keeping tension? And filming yourself is awesome for this. Again, like I said, do that squat, sit down in the bottom position, slowly bring yourself up, keep the tension on you, whatever. Record yourself doing that and see if your technique matches with the technique you have in your head of what it should look like. Because often you'll find, oh, I thought I was doing this, but I'm not doing that at all. And then you might have to refine your technique, drop the weights down that you're using, bring in a bit more tempo work, whatever it is that you need to do to assess or to address that issue, you're going to have to bring it in, So have that external focus of what a movement should look like, what a movement should look like given your biomechanics. Understand how that movement should feel, and then you can start bringing in and layering in kind of internal cueing so you can actually feel that musculature working. And again, once you've got all that, do assess whether you are locking down joint structures that shouldn't be moving in the exercise. Again, if you're doing bicep curls and you're trying to target the bicep, this elbow should not be coming up because that's not the function of the bicep, so assess why certain joints are moving. They may have to move to perform that exercise, but if that's not the function of that muscle that you're trying to target, it shouldn't be moving, So do assess that. Again, that's how you're going to make long-term progress in the gym, stay injury-free, and actually achieve the results that you're looking for.